What's that? I hit the recording already. Packet here, I could have just handed it to you.
We'll call the public hearing to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic for which it stands. The purpose of our hearing tonight is a presentation on the proposed school budget, the vehicle bonding proposition, and the Salina Library proposition. Mr. Keegan, the floor is yours.
Good evening. Sure, if you'd like. Good. Well, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the at a summary level, the fiscal 2017-18 school budget. We'll start by talking about our revenues, our foundation aid, which is the biggest component of our state aid. We'll talk about tax cap and tax rates, and we'll talk about our expenditures budget and our expenditure per pupil. We'll talk about our savings account, which is our fund balance and reserves, and we'll talk about vehicle bonding, the vote and election, and the budget process timeline. So as we've presented to the community on numerous occasions, the majority of our revenue comes from the tax levy, which is the blue slice of the pie, and state aid, the green. And as you can see, relatively, the tax levy is almost 54%, and the state aid represents 42% of our revenues. And it's by these two sources of revenues that our destiny is tied in terms of being able to do things. An interesting trend that has been occurring for a number of years now is that the burden of funding public schools has shifted from the state to the local taxpayer. And if you look at the 2008-2009 school year, you see that the pieces of the pie were relatively comparable, state aid being about 47% and local tax levy being 47.6%. In the 17-18 school year, the year we're talking about, state aid represents about 42.2% of our funding, and the local tax levy 53.7%. And this is an interesting shift given the fact that the tax cap is putting downward pressure on the local tax levy at the same time that the state is trying to shift that burden to the local taxpayer. As you can see from comparing our revenues, there are a few noteworthy changes. That first line, estimated general aid, that is our state aid, and the major component of that is foundation aid. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, but also included in there is BOCES aid and transportation aid and what's called excess cost aid, the aid for our special ed, supporting our special ed students. We did get an increase in our aid of about $1.2 million, or about 2.1%, but that was way lower than we expected. And as a result of that, we're going to spend down some of our savings, our fund balance, and I've bolded that on this slide to show you that we're going to spend $2.7 million of our fund balance, and I'll talk about more of that more in a moment. The budget is a total of $158.7 million, about a $3.5 million increase, or about 2.2% increase. A couple of key assumptions. This budget is based on the final state aid budget that was passed on April 9th. We also are dealing with a major shortfall in our foundation aid, which again I'll talk about in a moment. Our property taxes are at the tax cap, and the largest driving force there is inflation, which was 1.26%. And our building aid is always in flux based on projects and things going on at state aid. But one of the points I wanted to make that's very important is our citizens and our staffers and students will notice that we're making significant investments in technology. That is not being funded by the general fund. The majority of that is being funded by the Smart Schools Bond Act, so it has no impact on the general fund. Foundation aid. In 2006, the city of New York sued the state because they believed the state was not providing enough funding for the city to provide a sound basic education for its students. The rest of the state joined in this lawsuit, and this large lawsuit was settled in favor of the school districts, and it was determined that New York State was in fact not providing adequate funding, and that a formula was developed called the foundation aid formula, and that formula considers regional cost differences. For example, it might cost more to educate a student on Long Island than it would in the Adirondacks, and so the relative costs across the state are considered in the foundation aid formula, as is the wealth of each district. So a wealthy district would be expected to pay more through their local tax levy. A poor district would rely more on state aid. If you look at this chart, you'll see that in the 17-18 school year, the year we're talking about, the foundation aid that is expected is about $44.9 million, almost $45 million. The lawsuit requires that New York State pay us $53.2 million, almost $53.3 million. The state is going to pay us about $8.3 million less in foundation aid than is required by that lawsuit. Over the last 10 years or so, we've lost $145 million due to foundation aid shortfalls. Let's talk about the tax cap for a minute. This is moving off of state aid, looking at the local tax levy. That first line is the levy for the 16-17 school year. This formula, which is driven primarily by two factors. The second line, and there's our tax-based growth factor. And there's a misconception. I often have people come to me and say that, gee, they're building a lot of houses in Cicero. You guys must be getting a lot of additional school taxes. Well, it's important to note that we just calculate the levy, and that levy is spread over all the houses in our district. So we don't get any more money when we have more houses built in the district. But we do get a little bit of a bump based on this tax-based growth factor. And you can see that that increases our levy in the calculation here. The other big driving factor in our tax cap calculation is inflation, and that's represented by the allowable levy growth factor. And one of the things that most people remember about the tax cap calculation is that we can raise taxes by either 2% or inflation, whichever is less. And inflation this year was 1.26%, and so that's what's included in the tax cap calculation. So after going through this calculation and considering changes in both our pilot revenue, that's our payment in lieu of tax agreement that are in place for some economic development considerations done by the towns, participated in by the school district. After considering that, as well as our tax levy for capital, our levy increases to $85.2 million. That's the bottom number there. That's an increase of about $2.5 million, or 3.02%. So that represents about a $70 increase on a $100,000 home before STAR. And when you look at the three towns, Cicero, Clay, and Salina, if you have a house with a full value of $100,000, your estimated annual school tax bill before STAR is $2,388. Again, a $70 increase before STAR. Switching to expenses, the most important thing we do as a school district is put teachers in front of students. And so we're a people-based business. So you can see that about 78% of our costs, the blue section of the pie and the green section, are people costs. That's the most important thing we do. That's our largest cost. We do have debt service. That's kind of like the district's mortgage. We have debt service that we have to pay, about $9.3 million. We spend a lot of money with BOCES. That's the Board of Cooperative Education Services. We work with the 23 component districts, us being one of those 23, to collaborate and share expenses and put programs together, whether it be for special education programs or for our information technology. A variety of shared services are paid for through BOCES, and we spent about $14.5 million there. We also each year, and you might note in the last 3 years, we've had special projects each of the last 3 years. Those have been for security enhancements. At our high school, we put a single, more rigorous or more tighter controlled single point of entry. We are doing that at the junior high. We just completed a project at Gillette Road Middle School, and this $100,000 will allow us to renovate the lobby at Roxborough Road Middle School so that that'll be a more secure single point of entry where visitors have to pass through security before they can enter the building. So our expenditures are $158.7 million. You can see the increases here. This is the same slices of the pie, but just showing year-to-year comparison. Our salaries are going up about $2.3 million, or about 3.2%. It's important to note that we have 12 bargaining units here in North Syracuse. 10 of those contracts have settled with an increase of about 3%. Now, 3% might sound like a lot, but it's important for the community to remember that the previous contract, our employees settled for a 0% increase the first year, 1% each of the next 2 years, so they had less than a 1% increase for 3 years. Now, you also note there that the actual salary increase is in excess of 3%, and that's because we're making some additional investments in our special ed department in order to fully implement a more fully inclusive model where we're going to be pushing services, or we are pushing services, into the classroom. We started this year, and so we'll have more co-teaching and more services provided to our special needs students in the gen ed classroom. So we're adding 5 special ed teachers at the elementary level and 4 at the secondary level, as well as adding additional OT, PT, and speech services. On the benefits side, we've been fortunate with the stock market performance being strong. Our ERS benefits are, that's our employee retirement system benefits. The cost for those have been a flat percentage of our salaries. Our TRS, that's our teacher retirement system, those costs have actually come down. And our health insurance, with the move to Excellus, Blue Cross Blue Shield, we've had very favorable trends there. So all 3 of those have combined to have allow us to have a very modest increase in benefits cost. Overall, our expenditures again are $158,690,000, or about $3.5 million increase, or 2.22%. I've covered most of these assumptions. Some things that folks will relate to is the volatility in our energy costs, generally a positive trend over recent years, but it's something that we have to estimate and factor into our budget. I've mentioned retirement and benefits costs, as well as the work we do with BOCES, always looking to expand the opportunities to collaborate with other districts. We're also, our Regional Information Center was audited this year, and as a result of a controller's audit, we're changing some of the services that we purchase for information technology from BOCES, and those are factored into this budget. One of the slides we talk about every year is our expenditures per pupil. This compares the 23 districts here in central New York in the Onondaga, Cortland, Madison, BOCES area. And you can see North Syracuse is second to last in spending. And you might say, why do we spend less? Well, we spend less because we receive less. We're ranked 669th in the state out of less than 700 districts. So this is a direct result of not receiving the foundation aid that we should be receiving. If we receive that aid, we would certainly move up in the list of districts in terms of our spending per pupil. I would just add, it's not necessarily something to be proud of, although when folks say, hey, you spend too much money here in North Syracuse, I point to this chart and I say, well, this chart clearly proves that we don't spend as much as most districts on a per pupil basis. Let's talk about our savings and our general fund balance. 5 years ago, the district was considered a district under fiscal stress. We did not have enough fund balance, and therefore we were on a watch list in the state. The state would like to see districts have a fund balance of 4% of their budget. The top number on there represents what our fund balance was at $7.5 million at the end of June of 2016, the end of our last school year. That was a little over 4%. We worked hard to get there, and there are some investments, as I've mentioned, our special ed department to support our more inclusive model, but we also have found over the years we've made cuts to co-curricular and athletic activities that we felt very strongly needed to be restored, and we've put into this budget a little over $100,000 worth of spending that will provide opportunities for over 220 kids that would otherwise not be able to participate. Some of the things are things like Science Olympiad, very important for our students. We had some coaching positions added so that fewer kids would be cut, and we had some co-curricular activities that needed to be added so that our kids in North Syracuse had comparable opportunities to kids in Liverpool, ESM, and Beeville, and other districts around central New York. So we're spending some fund balance because we have the fund balance. We think it's the right thing to do. In doing so, it will lower our estimated fund balance at the end of this year to about 3% of our budget for next year. A little lower than where the state would like to see us, but we think this is an important thing to do in light of the needs of our students. Our reserves Another thing that people are not familiar with is that we have to have reserves for certain known liabilities. When a taxpayer here contests the assessment of their house, if they win, we have to pay them back their school taxes. And so we have reserves for every case that is currently being considered, and that's a specific reserve that we calculate for tax certiorari. The workman's compensation reserve, well, we're a people-based business, and unfortunately people get hurt on the job, and we have to cover that liability. We have a independent third-party administrator that helps us evaluate that liability and recommends to us and the board how much money we need to have set aside. I'll just point out that our reserves year over year are comparable, and that's a good thing, so that we know that those liabilities are adequately covered. Vehicle bonding. Many years ago, some wise people put a program in place here in North Syracuse to ensure that our fleet would be reasonably new, I should say. We don't have any buses, or shouldn't have any buses, that are over 10 years old. Now, I have to confess, we have a few, but this program allows us to minimize the number of buses that are over 10 years old. And why is that so important? With the roads, with the salt and the winter conditions here, rust is a factor. And when buses get older, they become more expensive to maintain. They're out of warranty, and they become less reliable. So we're going to buy 10 65-passenger buses, 2 special needs buses. Our special needs buses generally have air conditioning. We're buying one with a hydraulic lift for wheelchairs. And we're going to buy a plow truck. We've got an old plow truck that we've been holding together with duct tape and chewing gum, and we've done everything possible to get as many miles out of that thing as we can, but it needs to be replaced. And so the 13 vehicles we're buying is about $1.5 million. The program's consistent with past years. The dollar amount is very close to what we spent last year. And the tax impact after transportation aid, but before STAR, is about $2.10 for a home assessed at $100,000. It's a very reasonable investment, and important that we do that for the safety and reliability of our fleet. So in summary, our tax levy of about 3.02% is at the cap. Will require one more yes vote than no vote, and our budget is a 2.2% increase in spending. We're providing opportunities for students that is consistent with other districts in central New York, but it's requiring us to spend down some of our fund balance to do that. And so we're hopefully going to see some resolution of the foundation aid issue, because it's not sustainable for us to continue to spend our savings to fund our budget. I will point out also in summary that there are many people that in the district that would like to see us go over the tax levy, over the tax cap, I should say, and it's something that if the foundation aid is not resolved, we'll have to consider. But as long as the state owes us $8.2 million of money that's they should be paying us, we feel that we need to go after that first before we consider a higher tax levy. The budget vote is 2 weeks from today. The usual format, we'll have voting here at Cicero L. Here at the district office, as well as Cicero L, from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. If folks are wondering whether they're registered, or they know people in the community that would like to be registered, or curious as to whether they're registered, they can contact Connie Gibson here in the district office, and we can get them registered. That pretty much concludes the budget presentation, and the floor is open for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Don. If anyone has any questions, please stand up, identify yourself for the group, and go ahead, Phil.
You come up to the mic here, Phil.
Oh, yeah, come up to the mic. Thank you. That's right. Otherwise, it won't get on the recording.
Thanks. My name's Phil Cleary. I'm a community resident, district employee, and graduate of our schools. And I wanted to talk tonight a little bit about the budget, but more about process. I think most of the people in the room tonight will notice that there are a few things that are different The first thing is we have more filled seats than any one of these in anybody's memory. The second thing that's different is we have students from the high school, which is great. We don't usually have them here for a budget hearing. The third thing is that there's a seat that is conspicuously vacant tonight.
Yeah.
And that seat, I think, will always belong to Jane Paula. And for those of you who don't know her or didn't meet her, Jane was a community resident who was a frequent participant in school board meetings and always at budget hearings. And the reason I bring her up tonight is about engagement. Now, Janie and I disagreed frequently and sometimes loudly over 20 plus years, and that's really not that important. She asked a lot of questions that I think she sometimes knew the answers to, but that isn't really important either. But what is really important is that Jane was a community member and she showed up, and that's important. She always asked questions that were important to her, and that's important. And finally, she always had the strength and the passion to come out and talk about things that were important to her and speak truth to power, which is exactly what we want our students to do. So I think as we go forward in these proceedings, we should make a greater effort to engage our community, to engage our students, to bring them to this room so that all the seats are full every year. And I hope that we really take on that responsibility going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else? Sir, please come forward.
My name is Bill Waters. I'm a community resident around the corner here. What's the enrollment this year, up or down from last year?
It's down a little bit.
Every year, pardon?
It's down to about 80.
From what? What was it the year before?
About 100 more.
Oh, okay. So, but the trend is still downward.
We're declining.
The foundation aid, you said the school districts won that court case. Well, does anybody pay attention to the law? I don't understand why.
I'm as shocked as you are.
Yeah, well, I mean, how long has it been going on like that? And somebody hasn't gone to court again to enforce it. That's all. I'm just a layman. It's funny to see that we lost, or we won, but we still don't get the money. Is there any effort to try to get that?
So yes, you raise a really good question, and when people ask that question, I can't help but say, where would the rest of us be if we ignored a court order? So we're right in line with your thinking. This year, a month and a half ago, we combined efforts with Liverpool School District, and we held a community forum at our junior high school. We had legislators there. We had media coverage. We tried to educate the community and reach out and plead with our legislators to please, reinstate this foundation aid, and talked about why we need it, how we can't continue to live with this type of shortfall. As Don mentioned, we got a little bit more, but not nearly enough.
But this is statewide. Everybody's getting hurt.
Statewide,
right?
correct.
So I'm surprised
some
New York residents going right to,
So we're
right
going
to
to
court.
continue to work on that, and hopefully at some point it will be restored, or at least, maybe over time, because as Mr. Keegan mentioned, we made a decision this year to approach the budget a little bit differently, to do what we felt we needed to do for programs and for our students, and to give them a good quality education. But it's not sustainable in terms of, right now. So we're going to have to continue to make some noise and hopefully get.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else who wishes to ask a question or address the hearing? At this time, I'd like to introduce a few folks. Sitting Board of Education members that are here this evening: Mary Scanlon, Mike Leone, George Harrington, Paul Fufalia are with us. Candidates that are running: Aaron McDonald is right over here. Pat Swoboda is here. We also have two incumbents running that are not with us this evening: Mike Maurizio and Liz Cash. So we remind everybody to please, vote on May 16th. Again, you'll have the budget. You'll have the vehicle bonding proposition, the Salina Library proposition, and the election of three board members. Okay, I was unaware from the library. Please stand up, introduce yourself. Well, thank you, and thank you for coming. Appreciate it very much. Connie, is there anything else we need to cover? Okay. So being, we'll declare the meeting adjourned, 7:30. Thank you.